Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to present to you. This is a collaboration that we have that is very, very close and actually is led by the Air Center in the Azores. And what I'm going to talk to you is something that is going to take many years to build, and it needs everybody's help because it is an attempt to try to organize people, the biological community in particular, to try to collect data in a specific way, more organized than what we're doing now, sharing the data in standard formats, precisely to help feed data into forecasts of biology and ecology. So many of the things that we do depend on life in the ocean, including our own, and yet we don't have a good way to organize the data to forecast ecology. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope that this works. And if somebody can tell me if that works, I would really appreciate that. Perfect. So the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network is led by Joanna Suarez, the Executive Secretary at the Air Center, and I'm Frank Muller Karger at the University of South Florida. As I mentioned before, at present, there's a few system efforts here and there to collect biological data. It's very scattered. Most of the world is not covered, and many of the countries, especially in the global south, have little data. If you go to the interior of the ocean, as you remember, the ocean covers about 70+% of our planet, and it's about 4 kilometers deep on average. And yet most of that is not sampled routinely for, especially for biology. There's a lot of physical data, but not a lot of physical data below 2,000 meters. And there's hardly any biological data. The more deep you go, the worse the situation gets. And the worst thing is also that in biology, there are no accepted standards or conventions on how to collect specific kinds of data, of how to organize the data, data formats, and the databases that we have established to collect these data are still pretty empty of data in the middle of the ocean. So this is an issue. No? So what we would like to do in working with MBON is to organize a community to address these issues, to fill these gaps, to provide the data in standardized ways so that we can not only measure biology and the diversity of life in the ocean, but also see how it's changing. The issue is that a lot of us depend on marine life. There's a lot of food that is derived from the ocean, but there's also medicines, there's materials, there's a requirement in many cases to maintain a certain level of health in the ocean. So many of the other industries that may not use life directly have to report about the status of life or how it's impacted. All of that we call the blue economy or the economy of the ocean at the moment is estimated to provide about $1.5 to $2.5 trillion a year in benefits to humanity and a lot of jobs, millions of jobs. And yet that is still growing. It is estimated to grow to over $3 trillion by 2030. So this is the decade that we have to organize this in a better way and make this more effective, more profitable, and at the same time help and conserve those resources for the future. So it's that balance between conservation and development that is called sustainable that we are trying to address. The Marine Biodiversity Observation Network is a global community. We're trying to establish this community of practice to collect observations in a way that is that follows protocols, not only for how you collect the data, but also how you store the data. So data formatting is essential. And all of this is to disseminate the data in a way that is open and free so that you can feed models. It's the same thing that we do for weather, where you have a system that provides data on a routine basis daily to feed weather forecasting. Again, this is all organized through the Air Center in Terceira on the Azores. The Marine Biodiversity Observation System is sort of a tiered structure. It depends on what we call the Group on Earth Observations Biodiversity Observation Network, and that is part of GEO, the Group on Earth Observations. This is, I'm going to share this presentation, so if you're interested in this set of activities, you can register through it through GeoBond. Now, the entire concept is based on what we call essential variables. Essential variables is not necessarily a completely new system. It's already almost 10 to 15 years old. And it comes from the idea that there's a few measurements that you can collect to track climate and weather and see how things are changing. So initially there was an essential climate variables set. And these essential climate variables include land, atmosphere, oceans, and the oceanic climate variables are called essential ocean variables. So the essential ocean variables are managed by, so the definition, all the prescribed, what is it that you need to collect is managed by the Global Ocean Observing System, which is part of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. These specifications are then walked out to the community, and somebody has to organize the community to collect the data, and that's what MBON is trying to do. As part of the essential climate variables that deal with the ocean, so basically the essential ocean variables, there's a subset that deals with biology. These are what we call the biology and ecosystem essential ocean variables, or bioeco EOVs. The idea is to collect these in a systematic way around the world in a way that you can make maps. So right now, if you make maps of biology or which species lives where, as I mentioned, it's difficult to see that over time. So the eventual goal, or the goal, is to eventually have maps of different biological variables and biodiversity that change over time. So you can track things and see how they're related to physical and biogeochemical variables. So these maps that are maps of biological data are what we call essential biodiversity variables. So you can imagine that you can make maps of genetic composition of species around the world, of species traits like length, color, the phenology or how they vary over time, of migration, the community composition, and eventually, if you mix that with the physical and biogeochemical variables, you have ecosystem structure and ecosystem function. All of those things are what we call essential biodiversity variables. An example of what we call the bioeco essential ocean variables is shown here. And you can see that it covers microbes to whales, basically. So you have phytoplankton, zooplankton, fish, and so on, but also coastal habitats like corals, macroalgae, seagrasses, and mangrove. All of these things have an importance for humans. The idea is then to collect data in a way that is already planned to be shareable, to control the quality of the data and put it in a format that is standardized. And I don't know to what extent in this workshop you will learn how to do that, but there are several protocols that we use. For example, for taxonomy, we use something called Darwin Core, and Darwin Core is a data formatting protocol that has evolved over time originally from museum collections to now storing in a digital fashion and very interoperable data about the abundance of organisms, their productivity, their rate of growth, the different things that are related to an organism or groups of organisms, and that you can combine then with physical data like temperature, salinity, chemical data like oxygen or nutrients. You can then export that data. If it's standardized in a format, you can easily develop different ways to view it, and that can be used by many people around the world in a way that you don't have to know a lot about the data, but you can use common tools. We also bring in satellite data into this process. So many of the essential biodiversity variables that we're developing now combine different types of satellite data. So we have something called seascapes. Seascapes are effectively a clustered product of temperature, salinity, winds, sea surface height, and a number of ocean color or parameters derived from the color of the ocean. We call that ocean color, and you can derive indices of chlorophyll productivity, and including the radiation that reaches the ocean. So basically, irradiance. You can get maps like you have at the bottom here. This is the bottom tip of Florida, where we're trying to go with ships and validate these clusters to show or understand what the relationship is with life. Darwin Core is one of these formats that is very mysterious to people, but it's very simple. It's just a table with specific columns, and the column titles are very well specified and managed. And we put the data, we collect the data through a number of electronic methods and put it into a database called OBIS, Ocean Biodiversity Information System. There's another parallel database where a lot of terrestrial data goes. That's the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. And both of them together complement the global data sets for biodiversity. So we're trying to link in the same way with the same formats, terrestrial, freshwater, and marine observations. So all of these are just examples of how you would walk basically the data flow for biological data. So you take data like satellite observations or taxa observations. You use a specific format, be it Darwin Core or NetCDF for weather or physical data. Even the biological data can be stored in NetCDF files, and then you put it into databases that are interlinked, and a lot of people can use it using common tools. But eventually, what we're looking is for these maps that you can stack and see how different variables and different properties, different characteristics of life are changing over time. This is, I think, exactly what you're learning in this workshop. One of the ways that we try to advance this in a community of practice is through mechanisms that reach a lot of people. And one of them is the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, or what we call the Ocean Decade. The Ocean Decade started in 2021, so now we're in the third year and moving toward 2030. So we are supposed to change the way that we do business and ocean information to service the sustainable development needs of people around the world. So this is not only development, but conservation at the same time. What do we need to manage in a better way, be it through marine protected areas or understanding where animals or organisms grow or how they migrate, and putting that all together with physical data for the purpose of managing business in a way that is sustainable over the long term. And that has a heavy concentration of conservation. One of the programs that we put together, again, with the Air Center and the Azores, is something called Marine Life 2030. And so that's the program that tries to bring many different partners from around the world, from industry, the public, artists, biologists, you name it. We're all trying to talk to each other under Marine Life 2030. So this is to address the challenges of the Ocean Decade. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but the decade has these challenges that are very relevant to sustainable development. So this is MBON. I hope that I gave you a flavor. If you want to join, please write to Joanna Suarez. She's Executive Secretary, or register through GeoBond, or write me directly, or talk to Adriano Lima. Any one of us can tell you a little bit more about this. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Adriano Lima, and I'm a scientific programmer in the MBON, the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network that Frank just presented. Okay. and also Senior Project Officer at the S Center. Okay. Tá bem, okay. Pronto. So as Frank briefly introduced, the S Center hosts the Secretariat of MBON, a position held by Joanna, who's just there today. No? Yes. And this is an agreement not only between the MBON and the S Center, but also the Açores Regional Fund for Science and Technology. Okay. This is some of the goals which I am pursuing within the scope of both MBON and our center. We do several things, but this is what I would say it's most relevant for what we're doing in this workshop. Essential development, maintenance, and management of a system to process space-derived data products for a variety of applications. And these applications, as you expect, should be of high quality. Eventually, you'd like people to take decision using our products. A very strong work front of the S Center, satellite imagery. This has been previously introduced by you from João. This is the construction of our DRS. This is Interstellar Island in our technology park. And last year, we received our first images. This is our room. And finally, from data, we produce further data using both these satellite products, so satellite-derived imagery and data, and in situ oceanographic instruments. I'll proceed now with state-of-the-art and also some forthcoming products which were developed within the scope of MBON. If you go to the, it's not showing. Okay. How can I show the browser? How can I show a browser? Shall I share the screen? Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. So this is the MBON website. If you go here to data and products, you see the catalog of products which have been developed, essentially by the US MBON. Among several cool stuff that you can find here, I would like to highlight the tool products, which can be understood as building blocks for constructing applications. And this is something that that Julia could contribute. As far as I know, this is not being used, and this is a margin for expansion, where I'd be interested in knowing how Julia could contribute to these products. Okay. So again, you have seen this slide 2 days ago. One way of putting together all these developments that we would like to pursue is to come up with a relevant product. And for that, we have chosen marine protected areas as targets for these developments. In the Açores, we had several areas which were created in the last, starting 1980s, but particularly in the last decades. We have a big number now of marine protected areas serving different purposes, some coastal, some high seas, some with areas which are just a few hectares, while others are bigger than mainland Portugal. Unfortunately, not commonly to the Açores, but in many places worldwide, these marine protected areas could be working better. They could be more well managed. And beyond this, now we have this goal of having 30% protection by 2030. So more marine protected areas will most likely be created. but still you have to manage what exists already. And here we wrap up several sources of data and information, from in situ sensors located in vessels or fishing nets, to online tools such as a global fish watching the seascapes, to radar-based images, shift detection tools, etc. We can serve several instances that would support the proper management and directive of marine protected areas. So this is where the asset fits, not only in this initiative, but others, is to operationalize data flows. And a key point to do this is to have a robust end user engagement and co-creation. So if you really want the MPA managers and other stakeholders to use our data to get information and to eventually take decision, we must know what do they need. We must know what do they want, and we must know how we could improve our offer of data and data products. So to strengthen this pipeline, we bridge the technical implementations, which is our side, and we hear our stakeholders, what would they need. So among all this offer of products, what could be the key points for improvement? What kind of data, what resolutions, etc., that would be helpful for them to conduct activities. So we have come up with a pipeline for engaging end users. The first one would be identifying who are these end users and what policies and directives would apply for marine protected areas. But not only that, sectors in the blue economy. Here in the Azores, particularly, the fisheries are very important, as well as tourism, like whale watching, etc. We have several different directives applying to the marine protected areas, sometimes more than one to the same marine protected areas. So they have already target species or conservation targets, and these have to be complied, but also in many cases, they still don't have this clearly. And this is also something that we have to help. Finally, identification of tasks. In many cases, even the needs of the users is not clear for the users themselves. So you have to have a way to make people understand what is available and how these already state-of-the-art and forthcoming products could support managers. So information needs essentially data, physical data, biochemistry, and fisheries, which is very relevant for the Azores, but several others, biodiversity. For specific services, what would be the optimal time for this information to be displayed to the user? You need real time or near real time. Is it okay to be every 1 week? If you want to detect, for example, a fishing vessel which entered the marine protected area in a season that shouldn't be there, for example, should be as early as possible, for example. Finally, we try to match existing and forthcoming offers of data products. We have several available repositories for data and several tools, the ones I just showed in the MBON website, Copernicus, etc. And matching these with the management experience for the users or the potential users of these products. And finally, come up with innovative services. That's our goal, to make sure that people will use all this cool stuff that we are developing here. So that's all for now. If you have any questions. If not, then I'll give the floor to Gal. Yes.
So hello, everybody. Before I start, I'd like to thank both of the previous speakers and MBON for sponsoring this workshop. These were I'm very glad that we can have this. So I'm going to tell you about something a little different in the way of we went from observations. We're going to now talk about the modeling side of things on the same theme. So I'm going to tell you about the Biomes collaboration, which is my sponsor for being here. And then I'm going to go through a few case studies, and then I'm going to dig a little deeper into the modeling side. So Biomes stands for it's a project funded by the Simons Foundation. Biomes is the collaboration on computational biochemical modeling of marine ecosystems. And right under the logo, you see a brief definition of what we're trying to do. So we seek to develop and apply quantitative models of the structure and function of marine microbial communities at seasonal and basin scales. I would say also at the smaller scales, in fact. And I'll just mention briefly that we are interested in Julia collectively, and with a colleague of mine, Shen Wu, we are running a little Julia club kind of amongst ourselves. If you want more information on Biomes or the Simons Foundation, I put 2 links here that will be in the presentation that I will share. To illustrate what we do in Biomes, I've selected 4 studies from folks that were postdocs in our group, and I've done some great work in relation to the marine ecosystem. And so the first one by Meike Zonneveld was a machine learning exercise that resembles a little bit what was described by Frank in terms of the seascapes, although with somewhat more involved machine learning methods, and focusing more on the on a detailed description of the marine ecosystem. Chris Follett was looking at the seasonally moving boundaries inside of the marine ecosystems as seen by the satellites. The same theme, although with a slightly different twist, was explored by Greg Britton. And then Justin Yoon looked at a problem that is, how do you compare 2 images, essentially? There's something called the Earth mover's distance, which is a way to do that. And this was an application of this optimal transport methods to comparing 2 maps of chlorophyll data. To highlight the Julia side, I've put 3 links. One is to the workshop that I ran with 2 colleagues. I think I should be able to click it. Let me see. Yeah. At JuliaCon in 2021. So this was done with Benoît Pasquier and Zhen Wu. There's a 3-hour session for you to watch if you're interested in this. So this was an example of a Julia workshop in relation to this work. Where is my? I've put the link to a Julia package called Ocean Color Data, which does the following. I'm going to, I think, go straight here. So Ocean Color Data right now is a small package. It provides methods to go from the remotely sensed reflectances and the irradiances, the signals that the satellite gets, say in the OCCCI data sets, for example, you have these variables, to go from this to chlorophyll A. And then there's a couple of classification methods that are also included in there, specifically the one from Tom Jackson that was developed at PML in the UK, which is one of the partners within Biomes. Plankton individuals, which I don't think they've opened. Plankton individuals is a modeling framework. It's what's called an agent-based model, where we both represent in detail a population of plankton, as well as the surrounding conditions from a Eulerian point of view. And it's a model that runs both on CPUs and GPUs, and that we think has a lot of potential. This is the work by and large by Zhen Wu, and I contributed a little bit. All right. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I think about the modeling of marine ecosystems in general. So I would term this digital twins for ocean robots. This is in fact a presentation I gave here 6 months ago in this same room in a different context. And so I want to simulate observing systems. So for example, if you have an instrument that's drifting at sea, you might want to represent it as follows. You have an equation that gives you the displacement as a function of the currents and time, and then you integrate that forward. If you have something that floats, for example, like a surface buoy, you can account for that by keeping that to the surface. But in general, it's a three-dimensional problem. We will be coming back to this topic more in detail tomorrow in the hands-on session on simulating these sort of things. So this would be my simulation of observing system vessels, things we put at sea to observe the ocean. Could be a mooring as well, just simplifies the equation a little bit. And then you need to be able to simulate sensors. So here I've put a lot of things. I'm not going to go in detail, but these are the sort of things we want to simulate. So that goes from just a simple thermometer to something that would be like a chemostat put on a float. I'll get back to this in a second. And we want to also have modules for AI as part of this whole effort, as we are trying to replicate what you might term edge computing. Here is the model hierarchy that I'm considering, and I'm going to walk you through this in detail in a second. But the idea is to be able to line up all of those models to go from a climate scenario to a set of observations that can be fairly complex, but simulated by the computer. And so it goes as follows. On the left, you have the physics. I have this package that's written in Julia called climatemodels.jl. That is essentially a framework to drive models of all sorts of types. So with this, essentially, I can run any of the pieces there, and I can line them up one after the other. This is an example of a simplified climate model that is in the form now of a Pluto notebook, where you can click and play with it, change the parameters, and change the climate in the future. Once you have that, you can inject this into a model of ocean circulation that will distribute. In this case, this is a plot of ocean heat transport over the globe. So similarly, if you have an anomaly due to global warming, you can propagate that in the ocean. The next element is to adopt this more so-called Lagrangian point of view, where you're following an instrument along the fluid. So again, we will get back to this tomorrow, but this is typically the marine litter problem, where you have stuff that's floating near the surface, and so it feels really the currents near the surface, and it tends to converge in very specific regions. So we'll go through this one tomorrow. As you'll notice, this is pretty smooth, and that is because in this simplified example, I'm just using a climatology of the ocean circulation. But ultimately, we also want to account for things like this, which are those much narrower, smaller scale contrasts in both the ocean currents, as well as the properties that robots or marine ecosystem might encounter. There's a link to this to this figure. So if you click on it, you'll get to YouTube where you'll find this movie. I'm just going to run it for you from the screen because it's a little nicer this way. So this is something that I've done with Maki, in fact, that was presented yesterday by Simon and Lazaro. You're looking at a map of temperature near the surface from which I have computed temperature gradients. So just the point here is to get from this very high resolution model output, the sense of the temperature jumps that a marine ecosystem might encounter. So any of those little wiggles here, that's a little filament in the ocean. And we now have models that can generate these sort of things over the entire planet. This is something that's been carried out by my colleagues at NASA JPL, the model simulation. And so if I stop here, I think I have the Ether somewhere in this part. And we can do that over the entire planet. And based on Julia, we are able to analyze and visualize these data sets in a way that I would suggest is not so bad. If somebody is better than me, they'll do better. All right. So coming back to this. So I'm a little bit behind on time. So all of this is essentially for the physics, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the biology and the biochemistry, the way we represent it. First, we have a physics simulation. We can then drive a biology and biochemistry model from that. So this is a representation of the marine ecosystem discretization in the model that I'm currently using. This is from the work by Stephanie Dukevich and colleagues, and Mick Follows and colleagues in our department. Well, leads of the Sea Biomes program. What you're looking at here is, I think there is in this one 35 phytoplankton types and 16 zooplanktons. There's an axis for functional groups and an axis for size. So it's a highly resolved model in terms of the marine ecosystem. It also has, so it's been run on different model resolutions, and it also has a complete or very detailed representation of the way that radiation is penetrating through the surface and through the ocean. And so that allows us to compare with satellite data and in situ data that are of bio-optical nature. This is an example of the classification work. The second kind of model is the one I've mentioned before, and this is from Zhenbu's work. Here's the physiology in the agent-based model. And so we are taking this and we are running this, for example, on the little floating device that's going to move around, which is a way to allow us to estimate growth rates, which are hard to observe from the way that the ecosystem reacts. So all put together, we're talking about simulations of innovative observing systems like this, where you'd imagine you have a set of instruments drifting near the sea surface, and each one of them would have a way to experiment with growth rate and measure it through aquacosion experiments. Here is another example of the things we're interested in. Here you have a estimation on the left of chlorophyll time series from chlorophyll data. On the right, the same thing, but estimated by observing a bunch of other variables and predicting chlorophyll through a neural network. So we want to be able to anticipate the way that an observing system like this would behave. That would be a float or drifter where we would have an AI to predict certain variables we cannot, or we don't want to directly observe. I'll just finish with this to highlight the fact that this is not something far in the future. What I'm describing, this sequence of modeling, it is basically there. The only thing that's expensive to run, expensive meaning more than, say, a few hours, is the kilometer scale model, the one I showed you the animation of. Everything else you can essentially run on a small cluster or your laptop. And we have a lot of the technology ready through a lot of different Julia packages. So here I'm listing some that have to do with files. Dataverse.gl is something I created recently to interact with the Dataverse platform. NC datasets was sort of already talked about. It's about netcdf files. For animation and visualizations, we have things like Maki and Pluto that are outstanding, in my opinion. For interactivity, again, we can rely on sort of those two frameworks. And the cloud computing structure, or the way that we allow people to replicate our computations, is also in place. In fact, that's the reason why we are using Docker in this conference, is because I've worked on it before. And I would say the last piece that I kind of need to put together is web apps and APIs. Again, there is a lot of different Julia solutions for this. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Yes, it is. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope I didn't take too much time. Thank you.